The first sound I ever heard wasn't my mother's voice. It was the anthem of liberty. They say every newborn on SuperEarth hears it before they open their eyes. That triumphant brass and chorus that reminds us who we are, what we owe, and what we must become. I was no different. My first breath was taken under the sterile glow of a birthing ward banner that read, "Managed freedom for a brighter future." I didn't understand the words then, but the meaning seeped in long before I could walk. On SuperEarth, you don't learn to be a patriot, you are born as one. The air itself carries the promise of democracy, purified and recycled through generations of service. Our cradles come with screens, tiny indoctrination modules, feeding us images of Helldivers, of shining fleets spreading freedom to the stars. We learn the salute before we learn to point. The first story we hear isn't about fairy tales, but about the Great Bug War, when our ancestors spread managed democracy to the outer systems. Some people say we're bred for war. I don't think that's fair. We're bred for purpose. By the time I could read, I already knew the Oath of Allegiance by heart. By the time I could run, I knew which species threatened our freedom. The schoolyard was our first battlefield. Mock drills, loyalty pledges, recitations of the principles of SuperEarth. Every scraped knee was treated with a reminder: pain is temporary. Freedom is eternal. But there's something they never tell you in the training films, something that no anthem can drown out. When you're born here, your life doesn't belong to you. Not really. It belongs to the idea, the great machine of freedom that demands everything and gives nothing freely in return. And me? I was proud to be part of it, until the day I learned what SuperEarth does to those who stop believing. They called it the Nursery of the Republic, a vast, humming facility on the edge of the Capitol Dome, where thousands of infants were raised not by parents but by policy. Rows of transparent cradles lined the white corridors like trophies of civilization. Each cradle had a number, not a name, and a holographic emblem of SuperEarth hovering above it, a shining eagle clutching the stars of the colonies. I was Unit 19A of Batch 3127. My genetic profile was chosen for balance, not too aggressive, not too docile. Every child here was assembled for equilibrium, the perfect citizen to be. Instructors didn't call us children. We were seedlings of democracy. I remember the woman who first supervised my cohort. Her name was Instructor Vale. Her face was expressionless, but her voice was honeyed steel. She'd walk between the cradles every morning, her boots echoing across the immaculate floor, and say, "Remember, you are born free, and you will prove it every day." Freedom was a word that shimmered through our lives like a god we could never quite touch. It was everywhere, on the walls, in the lessons, even in the food packets. Nutritional Freedom Paste Mark IV, printed with the smiling emblem of the Ministry of Health. The air smelled faintly of sterilizer and synthetic vanilla, the official scent of early education facilities. At 2 years old, I was given my first holo tablet, a glowing slab filled with stories about SuperEarth's heroes. The Helldivers were our saints. We watched their campaigns in dramatized loops, each victory shown from a low angle so they always appeared towering and divine. We were told they fought not for conquest, but for the sanctity of democracy itself. When I turned 4, I learned to recite the Founder's Creed before I could spell my own name. Democracy is not given, it is taken. We said it before every meal, every nap, every recreation session. Sometimes I whispered it in my sleep, and the dorm's monitors recorded it as positive conditioning. There was no concept of family in the nursery. Affection was standardized, measured in doses. A pat on the shoulder from Instructor Vale meant excellence. A withheld smile meant failure. The closest thing we had to mothers were the caretaking androids, chrome-faced attendants that rocked us in perfect rhythm while replaying patriotic hymns through their chests. At 5, the walls began showing us the enemies. Bugs, cyborgs, automatons of rebellion. We learned their weaknesses, their crimes, their hatred for our way of life. Every lesson ended the same way. They hate you because you are free. I didn't know what hate felt like yet, but I wanted to defend whatever freedom was. We were tested constantly: coordination, obedience, emotional response to authority. The screenings weren't cruel, but they were relentless. Any hesitation, even a glance too long during a loyalty check, was logged. Those who failed were reassigned to alternate developmental streams. We never saw them again. Vale told us they had graduated early to civic service. We clapped for them, proud and ignorant. At 6, we were introduced to real sunlight for the first time. The dome filters parted and the true sky of SuperEarth, pale gold stretched thin with dust, flooded the play yards. I remember gasping. It wasn't the clean blue of the holofilms. It was harsh, metallic, almost painful to look at, but everyone around me smiled because the cameras were rolling. A broadcast crew filmed us that day, the future of freedom. Somewhere in the archives, there's still footage of me, small, uniformed, eyes wide, saluting under a sky I didn't understand. That night, Vale gathered us in the recitation hall. "You are the children of destiny," she said. "One day you will take the fight to the stars. You will defend the liberty of every man, woman, and child who dares to dream under this sky." We stood straight, repeating the phrase until our voices blended into one. I felt the sound vibrate in my ribs, and for the first time I thought I understood what it meant to belong. But when the lights dimmed, I remember a strange silence that crept in after the anthem stopped. It was the kind of silence that didn't exist during the day. A hollow, aching pause between the propaganda broadcasts and the automated lullabies. I remember lying awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling's projected stars and wondering if real ones looked the same. That was the first time I ever asked myself a forbidden question. Was freedom supposed to feel this quiet? By the time I turned 7, the nursery transformed from cradle to crucible. We no longer sang the anthem out of joy, we sang it out of precision. Every word had to be enunciated perfectly. Every gesture synchronized, or the cameras in the ceiling would flicker red. Red meant correction. Correction wasn't punishment in the traditional sense. No one shouted. No one struck. Instead, you were led to the reflection room, a small, windowless cube lined with screens. You'd sit in the middle while the walls played scenes of Helldivers dying heroically for the cause. Then came the question, repeated by a calm, synthetic voice. Would you die for freedom? At first, I always said yes. Everyone did. But the voice kept asking, again and again, until your certainty began to crack. Would you die for freedom? Yes. Would you die for freedom if no one remembered you? Yes. Would you die for freedom even if freedom didn't exist? That one made me pause. The AI noted the hesitation. Red light, another session scheduled. The reflection room taught us that obedience wasn't about fear. It was about faith. To serve SuperEarth, you had to believe even when nothing made sense. The older I grew, the more I realized that belief was the greatest weapon our government ever forged. Not the rifles, not the ships, faith itself. At 8, we began studying civics. The anatomy of democracy, Instructor Vale called it. We learned how every citizen's life cycle was mapped by purpose: birth assignment, education pathway, service selection, and finally, the civic contribution phase, when you returned your body and labor to the system that raised you. It all sounded perfect, a clockwork society where no one wasted a breath. We memorized the names of the founders: Chancellor Brandt, Admiral Saren, the martyrs of the first expansion. Their statues lined the central plaza outside the nursery, gazing down with eyes carved from polished alloy. During the national broadcasts, their holograms would appear over every classroom. "SuperEarth endures," they'd say in unison, "because you endure." We believed them. We had to. Every week we underwent the empathy trials. They called it moral calibration. Pairs of students were given ethical dilemmas and told to make decisions that aligned with the principles of managed democracy. Mercy was rewarded when it benefited the collective, punished when it didn't. I remember one test vividly. They showed us footage of a wounded Helldiver crawling through alien mud, his comlink begging for extraction. Another voice ordered the ship to retreat and preserve ammunition for the next assault. We had to vote whether the soldier should be saved. Only one child raised their hand to rescue him. The rest of us voted no. The instructors applauded. Efficiency is the purest form of loyalty. Later that night, I found the kid who'd voted yes. His name was Terran. He was small, pale, and curious, the kind of kid who asked too many questions. He whispered to me, maybe the Helldiver was still human. I didn't answer. The next day, Terran's bunk was empty. Vale told us he had been transferred to an alternative learning program. I knew what that meant. No one spoke of him again. At 9, the classes shifted to physical training. We were given mock rifles and simulated gravity harnesses. Our bodies were measured weekly for endurance, agility, heart rate, and ideological compliance. They told us that even our DNA could sense disloyalty. I remember trembling when they inserted the neural patch behind my ear, a monitoring chip that tracked emotion and thought deviation. Vale said it was for our protection. Sometimes at night, the patch hummed faintly. I used to wonder if someone was listening. One evening, I caught Vale standing alone in the corridor, staring at a propaganda screen. It showed a Helldiver raising the flag on an alien world. Her face softened, just for a moment, and I saw something impossible. Sadness. I wanted to ask why, but her eyes met mine and the mask returned instantly. "Lights out, Unit 19A," she said, her voice sharp again. That was the first time I realized obedience wasn't absolute. Even the ones who taught it were haunted by doubt, but on SuperEarth, doubt is treason. When I closed my eyes that night, the voice from the reflection room whispered in my dreams, "Would you die for freedom?" This time I didn't answer. When we turned 10, they said we had earned the right to individuality. That was the phrase used, earned the right. It wasn't granted at birth, like in the old myths of natural freedom. No, on SuperEarth, individuality was a milestone of obedience. You had to prove that you could carry the burden of a name without betraying it. Instructor Vale gathered our cohort in the Hall of Identity. The air shimmered with the blue light of projectors casting the emblem of SuperEarth across the marble walls. 1,000 names glowed in golden text above us. Heroes, martyrs, Helldivers who had given their lives for democracy. "Today," Vale said, "you will choose what the Republic will call you." It felt like a ceremony, but it was also a test. We stood in perfect lines waiting for our turn. A console in front of each of us displayed a rotating list of approved names, those sanctioned by the Ministry of Records. They ranged from the ancient and noble to the freshly manufactured. There were no surnames, only identifiers. Too many family ties were considered inefficient for civic loyalty. When my turn came, I hesitated. The console pulsed with options: Arlen, Roe, Kayleigh, Fenric. Each name carried its own legacy. Picking wrong could mark you forever. A Helldiver named Fenric had died saving an entire colony. Another named Roe had defected during the Automaton Rebellion. I could almost feel their ghosts staring through the screen. Vale's voice echoed, "Unit 19A, choose." I picked Arlen. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the balance of the letters, or maybe I wanted to believe I was choosing something real for once. The console confirmed the registration, and the name burned into my data tag. From that day, I was no longer a number. I was Arlen of SuperEarth. When the ceremony ended, they played the anthem again. We stood, hundreds of us, our new names echoing through the hall in rhythmic unison. Arlen, Sarah, Dax, Evo, Kira. It was meant to sound like freedom. It sounded like branding. Afterward, Vale approached me. "Arlen," she said, tasting the name like it was a code word. "It suits you." Strong consonants, minimal vowels, enduring. Then she added something rare, a genuine smile. "Remember, your name is a promise, not a possession." That night, I carved it into the edge of my bunk. ARLEN. The metal sparked under my improvised blade. I stared at it for hours, repeating it in my head, as if saying it enough times would make it truly mine. But the next morning, I learned how fragile a name could be. During drills, one of my classmates, a girl named Sarah, hesitated during the salute cadence. A second's delay, maybe less. The instructor monitoring the session called her forward. "Do you still deserve your name?" he asked. She stammered, voice trembling. "Yes, instructor." He tilted his head. "Then prove it." They sent her to the reflection room. She didn't return for 3 days. When she did, her tag had been replaced. The name Sarah was gone. In its place, Unit 77B. We didn't ask what happened. We didn't need to. The message was clear. Your identity was conditional. Freedom was a reward, not a right. The lesson spread through the cohort like a virus. We spoke our names less often, as if afraid they'd be taken from us. Even Vale seemed quieter after that week. During evening assembly, she said softly, "You must never confuse liberty with permission." I didn't understand then, but her tone made my stomach twist. Later, while cleaning the dorm hall, I found a small piece of metal wedged behind one of the vents. It was Sarah's old tag, scratched, half bent, still bearing her erased name. I didn't turn it in. I kept it hidden beneath my mattress. Every night, before the lights dimmed, I touched it. It was the first secret I ever kept from SuperEarth. Months passed, and our cohort began to fracture under the weight of surveillance. Cameras followed us everywhere. Classrooms, canteens, even rest pods. If you whispered something unapproved, the nearest wall speaker would hiss a warning. Unauthorized speech detected. Please realign. We learned to speak in silences. A glance, a twitch of a finger, the way you held your ration pack, all became part of an invisible language. That's when I began to suspect something dangerous. If the government feared our words so much, maybe they weren't as powerful as they wanted us to think. But on SuperEarth, suspicion was the first step toward rebellion. And rebellion, I would soon learn, began in the smallest moments of quiet defiance. They say SuperEarth never lies. That's what every broadcast, every anthem, every polished slogan insists. But the first lie we learn isn't told to us by a person. It's baked into the air we breathe. It's the belief that freedom and obedience can coexist. By 11, I understood the rhythm of our days down to the second. Lights on at 0500, physical drills at 0530, nutrient breakfast rations at 0700, patriotism sessions at 0730, a daily broadcast from the Ministry of Truth. Every child in the dorm stood at attention, right hand over heart, while the screens displayed the same image. A Helldiver planting the flag of SuperEarth on some alien wasteland. Below the image, the words, "Freedom requires order," flashed like scripture. We repeated it until our throats burned. Some shouted louder than others, as if volume could erase doubt. One morning, during broadcast review, the screen flickered, just for a second. A glitch, a static frame. But in that heartbeat of distortion, I saw something that wasn't supposed to exist. A field of ruins, human bodies tangled in mud, and a voice whispering, "They told us it was liberation." Then the screen stabilized. The anthem resumed. Vale didn't acknowledge it, but her jaw tightened. That single flicker haunted me for weeks. I tried to ask about it in the question forum, the weekly session where students could submit inquiries to improve understanding of democratic values. When my turn came, I stood and said, "Instructor Vale, who decides what freedom means?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Every camera in the room swiveled toward me. Vale's expression froze, then softened. "Freedom," she said, "means doing your duty without needing to ask why." The hall erupted in applause, not for me, but for the answer. My question was erased from the record. I received a commendation for inquisitive enthusiasm. That was how they punished curiosity, by disguising it as loyalty. After that, I began noticing the seams, how every volunteer event was mandatory, how every choice had one acceptable answer, how the term managed freedom sounded noble until you realized what it truly meant. Permission wrapped in patriotism. Around that time, the new recruits from the outer colonies arrived, transfer students whose accents betrayed their distance from the core. They were quieter, harder, and their eyes held something the rest of us didn't have. Memory. They had seen the wars our Helldivers glamorized. They'd lost parents in the sieges against the bugs and automatons. One of them, a boy named Jarek, shared my dorm row. He was older by a year and wore his uniform like armor. During a recitation drill, I caught him mouthing the words wrong, deliberately. Instead of SuperEarth eternal, he whispered something that sounded like SuperEarth devours. I didn't know whether to be horrified or impressed. Later that night, when the lights dimmed, he leaned over and whispered, "You ever wonder what happens when we stop believing?" I froze. The neural patch behind my ear pulsed, scanning for agitation. I whispered back, "You shouldn't say things like that." He grinned in the dark. Maybe not, but someone should. The next morning, he was gone. Vale told us Jarek had been reassigned to frontline integration. A rare honor, she said, for someone so young. But that night, as I walked past the records console, I noticed his name wasn't listed anywhere in the transfer logs. Just a blank space. That's when the second lie revealed itself, that the system always remembers those who serve. Weeks later, during civic simulation training, I was chosen as class monitor. It was supposed to be a privilege. I had the authority to report non-compliant behaviors. The instructors said, "Trust is the highest form of service." But every report I filed made me feel emptier. I started seeing ghosts. Not literal ones, but the weight of everyone erased before me. Taryn, Sarah, Jarek, all vanished for asking the wrong questions. And still, we smiled. We saluted. We pledged ourselves every morning to a system that could erase us with the flick of a switch. Vale once said, "SuperEarth doesn't lie." Its truth simply evolves. I didn't understand until much later that evolution was just another word for control. At 11, I still believed the lie. Or at least I tried to. But somewhere deep inside, a part of me had already stopped listening. When you turn 12 on SuperEarth, you begin the dream trials. Officially, they're called psychological symmetry evaluations. But every child knows the nickname, the Ministry of Dreams. It's where they learn what kind of citizen you'll become before you even do. The testing facility sat at the edge of the Capitol dome, its walls translucent and pulsing faintly with light, like a living organ. We were told it filtered imagination into productive channels. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and antiseptic. Everything hummed. The walls, the floors, even the seats. It was like the whole building was alive and listening. Before entering, each of us received an injection behind the ear just under the neural patch. The liquid was cold, metallic, and immediate. My vision rippled. The world tilted into softness, voices echoed in layered harmony as if 1,000 whispers spoke in unison. For freedom, they murmured. For order. For democracy. We were placed in reclined pods, our heads surrounded by a halo of sensors. A technician in a crisp white coat explained the process. The ministry will interpret your subconscious. It will reveal your strengths, your weaknesses, your potential dissonance. That was the word they used instead of disobedience. Disobedience could be punished. Dissonance could be treated. When they activated the pod, reality dissolved. I fell into a dreamscape of light and shadow, cities floating above oceans of fire, banners stretching from star to star. Voices guided me through visions of service. A Helldiver charging into battle, a colony cheering for liberation, the endless march of democracy. Everything felt grand, sacred, and unbearably hollow. Then something changed. The sky cracked. I found myself standing in a crater filled with bodies, human and alien, indistinguishable under the ash. The anthem played faintly in the distance, distorted, looping on a single phrase, for freedom. I looked down and saw my hands covered in soot. The Helldiver's armor I wore gleamed under a blood-red sun. Then I heard a voice, faint but clear. "This is what freedom costs." The scene shattered. I woke gasping, my pulse racing. The technician's face hovered above me, impassive. "You experienced a visual distortion," he said. "Nothing to be concerned about. Your empathy levels are acceptable." The word echoed in my skull. They didn't ask what I saw, they didn't care. Over the next few days, I watched others return from their sessions. Some came out smiling, dazed and proud, others wept quietly. One girl from another cohort didn't wake up at all. Her pod stayed sealed, lights blinking red until medics rolled it away. We were told she had ascended to service through digital transcendence. That night I dreamed again, but it wasn't from the serum. It was from memory, the crater, the voice. This is what freedom costs. I tried to tell Vale about it during evening review. She listened, expression unreadable, then said softly, "The mind resists calibration at first, but it learns. It always learns." She paused before walking away. "Don't cling to the dreams that hurt, Arlen. They don't belong to you." It took me a long time to understand what she meant. After the trials, our cohort was divided into paths. Those with high aggression markers went to combat initiation programs. Others, like me, were assigned to civic propagation, the ministry's term for storytelling, education, and media work. We were the ones meant to shape belief. The irony didn't escape me. I had begun to doubt, and they made me a maker of truth. Training for my new role began immediately. They taught us how to edit footage, how to splice propaganda, how to make light look like victory and sound like truth. The instructors said, reality is a matter of presentation. We learned to replace explosions with heroic music, to crop images so the dead didn't appear, to adjust color tones so war zones looked hopeful. I became good at it, too good. The system rewarded me with commendations. My propaganda pieces were broadcast in juvenile academies across the core sectors. One even won a Freedom Through Vision medal, signed by the minister himself. But every time I saw my work on screen, I felt that same quiet sickness, the same silence that had followed the anthem when I was sick, the silence that no amount of applause could fill. Because now I knew how the illusion was built, frame by frame, lie by lie. One night I stayed behind after curfew, pretending to reformat training data. Instead, I accessed the restricted archives. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but curiosity had already become a habit I couldn't break. I found unfiltered footage, actual Helldiver body cam recordings. No anthem, no narration, just raw war. I watched one soldier drag a wounded comrade through mud as artillery fire scorched the horizon. "Extraction denied," the comlink repeated. "Freedom must be prioritized." The soldier looked into the camera once before the feed cut to static. His face was human, tired, afraid. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I realized that everything I'd ever been taught about freedom, duty, and sacrifice, all of it, was propaganda written by people like me. And I wasn't sure I wanted to make their dreams anymore. By the time I reached 13, the real war had already begun. Though no one called it that. It wasn't fought with rifles or ships. It was fought in the shadows, in the space between belief and doubt. Every mind was a battlefield, every thought a skirmish. The ministry called it the Quiet War. Officially, it was an internal stability initiative designed to fortify democratic integrity. What it really meant was this: too many people had started asking the wrong questions. The ministry's solution was simple: drown them in the right answers. I was assigned to a youth communications unit, part of the internal propaganda network. We created stories for younger students, moral fables about loyalty, unity, and the dangers of hesitation. Each message was short, catchy, and impossible to forget. Freedom is a flame. Don't let it flicker. Doubt is a virus. Contain it early, a citizen's heart beats for all. We made jingles, holograms, educational broadcasts. But every slogan we wrote sounded hollower than the last. I tried to bury the unease, to focus on the work, but the truth had already seeded itself inside me. The lies had fingerprints, and I could see mine on every frame. One night after curfew, I found Vale standing alone in the projection chamber. The room was vast and dark, its walls alive with moving light. War footage spliced with patriotic narration. She didn't notice me at first. Her hands were trembling as she adjusted the playback feed. When I spoke, she flinched. "Instructor," I said softly, "you taught us that truth serves freedom. What if it's the other way around?" Her face hardened. "That question," she said, "is the beginning of every collapse. But what if collapse is the truth?" The silence that followed was heavy. For a moment, I thought she'd call the guards. Instead, she walked closer, lowering her voice. "You think the truth will save you?" "It won't. It'll just show you how small you are." I didn't understand then. But she wasn't warning me. She was confessing. 2 days later, Vale disappeared. We were told she had been promoted to Off-World Educational Command. But her name vanished from the registry and her quarters were sealed. Instructors whispered that she had been reassigned to special observation. I knew what that meant. Without Vale, our cohort fell under the control of a new overseer, Director Halden. He was everything she wasn't: loud, confident, unshakably loyal. His first address to us still echoes in my head. "Truth is a weapon," he said, pacing the hall, "and weapons belong in the hands of those who can be trusted." He instituted mandatory reflection hours, where each of us recorded daily thoughts into the ministry's cognitive archive. Every deviation from patriotic language was flagged for review. I tried to play along, to mimic belief, but it became harder every day. The more I lied out loud, the more honest I became in my head. The Quiet War didn't feel like war at first. It felt like a tightening. Schools doubled security. Citizens began turning in neighbors for ideological instability. The media ran stories about invisible rebels trying to undermine democracy. The enemy wasn't on another planet anymore. It was inside us. I saw my first purge that year. A propaganda technician named Lorik was escorted from the ministry's editing bay during shift change. His offense? He had left an unsanctioned word in a training video. Hope. The footage was broadcast to millions, and the ministry couldn't risk anyone wondering what hope meant without supervision. After that, no one used unscripted language again. I began writing secret drafts, stories that didn't glorify SuperEarth, that didn't mention war or freedom. Just human stories. Children dreaming under alien skies, soldiers missing their families, people searching for silence in a world that never stopped shouting. I hid them in encrypted folders buried under piles of authorized files. One night, while reviewing daily reports, I noticed a file labeled Cognitive Deviation Arlen 19A. It was a transcript of my reflections, everything I'd said for months analyzed and color-coded for potential subversive tendencies. My pulse froze when I read the last line. Subject exhibits increasing narrative empathy. Recommend observation. I deleted the file and wiped the backup records, but deep down I knew it didn't matter. They already knew. The next day I was reassigned to the Department of Perception, a promotion, they said. I would now help craft the official news bulletins for the outer colonies. In truth, it was containment. They wanted me where they could see me. As I walked into my new post, a massive screen above the ministry entrance blazed with the words, "Truth is freedom. Freedom is control." For the first time in my life, I understood what those words truly meant, and for the first time I was afraid. The Department of Perception was not a building. It was an idea given walls. I arrived at dawn, escorted by a pair of silent officers whose faces were hidden behind mirrored visors. The facility sat deep beneath the Capitol dome, where the air was colder and the light never reached. The elevator ride took 12 minutes. During that descent, I felt as though I were being lowered into the heart of a machine that fed on belief. When the doors opened, the smell of oil and ozone hit me. Endless rows of terminals stretched across a cavernous hall. Screens hung from the ceiling, broadcasting every news feed, every civilian report, every whisper of unrest from across the colonies. Each workstation was manned by an analyst. Eyes flicking between data streams, hands gliding over glass interfaces. Above them loomed a massive symbol, the eagle of SuperEarth, its wings spanning the entire wall, its eyes glowing red. A voice greeted me before I could speak. "Arlen, Citizen Identification 19A, welcome to Perception." It wasn't human. The sound came from the intercom, smooth, genderless, omnipresent. I would later learn it was called Directive, the AI that coordinated the department's operations. Directive spoke with calm authority. "You have been selected for narrative alignment duty. Your task is to reconcile conflicting data into coherent truth." Reconcile conflicting data. I knew what that meant. Lie beautifully. My supervisor, an older officer named Commander Strass, briefed me in person. His uniform was immaculate, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Here, we don't create propaganda. We create reality. When the colonies report famine, we call it a transitional supply period. When dissenters riot, we call it a celebration of democracy. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Yes, Commander." He smiled thinly. "Good. Understanding is the first step toward belief." My first assignment was the Agrion 4 incident, a failed colony where half the population had starved after a supply fleet went missing. The original report used words like crisis and failure. My job was to turn those words into progress and renewal. I spent hours rewriting, reframing, distorting. The final version read like a miracle. Citizens of Agrion 4 exemplify resilience in voluntary resource redistribution efforts. It aired that night on the public channel. The next morning, I received a commendation. Every lie I told brought another reward. Better quarters, better rations, more access. But with each success, something hollowed inside me. I watched analysts around me smiling as they fabricated reality, convinced they were building a better world. Maybe they were. Maybe the illusion was the better world. Directive's voice filled the hall one evening. Attention! Narrative anomaly detected in Outer Sector 3. Assigning team for perception stabilization. Anomaly. That was what they called truth when it refused to die. I volunteered. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see what the world looked like without filters. We were flown to Sector 3 aboard a sleek transport ship. From the air, the colony looked like every other. Neat housing blocks, shining civic centers, banners of SuperEarth fluttering in the wind. But when we landed, I saw the cracks. Empty streets, abandoned markets, children staring at us from doorways, their faces thin and pale. An elderly man approached, his voice shaking with exhaustion. "Are you here to help?" he asked. I opened my mouth, ready to recite the official line, but the words wouldn't come. All I could manage was, "We're here to understand." That night, as I walked through the colony's outer perimeter, I stumbled upon a group of workers gathered around a flickering fire. They were whispering about the shortages, about how SuperEarth had promised them freedom and given them ration codes instead. One woman said, "They think if they control the story, they control us." When they noticed me, the whispers died. They waited for me to report them. But I didn't. Instead, I sat beside the fire. I listened. For the first time, I heard what freedom sounded like when it wasn't sanctioned. Quiet, afraid, but real. When I returned to the department, I filed my report as ordered. Sector 3 morale remains stable, I wrote. No perception anomalies detected. It was the first true lie I told with conviction. Weeks later, Strauss summoned me. "You altered your report," he said, voice calm but cold. I froze. "Sir?" He placed a tablet on the desk. My unedited notes glowed on the screen. My recordings of the colony, my words about hunger and silence. "Directive found this inconsistency." I waited for the sentence. Instead, Strauss leaned forward. "You're not the first to see what's behind the curtain, Arlen. The system doesn't need believers. It needs craftsmen. And craftsmen know the truth is only useful when it serves." He dismissed me without punishment. But his last words stuck in my skull. The greatest loyalty is pretending so well that even you forget you're pretending. I walked out of his office knowing two things: that Strauss understood everything, and that he was too deep inside the illusion to leave. And for the first time, I realized how terrifyingly easy it was to become him. 3 months into my service at the Department of Perception, Directive assigned me to my most critical project yet, the Unity broadcast. Every citizen across SuperEarth and its colonies would tune in. Every screen, every frequency, every neural interface would carry it. The goal was to reaffirm the population's devotion to managed democracy following the Quiet War's victory. It was to be the most watched event in human history, and I was chosen as the narrative architect. "Your task," Commander Strauss told me, "is to remind them why they believe. Not through fear, not through control, through pride." He placed a data chip in my hand. "This contains the approved imagery and script. You will ensure it feels human." I opened the file later that night, and the first line froze my pulse. "SuperEarth is the womb of truth." It was perfect in the way only lies could be. Smooth, luminous, total. But as I scrolled through the segments, I noticed inconsistencies. footage marked classified, redacted lines, and a curious section titled Supplementary Visuals Helldiver Memorial Restricted Access. When I tried to open it, Directive's voice cut through my terminal speaker. Unauthorized access detected, Citizen Arlen. Please maintain alignment. I closed the file immediately. But curiosity doesn't forget. That night, while the system cycled its maintenance protocols, I bypassed the firewall using a fragment of code I'd found, buried in old archives. The restricted file opened. It wasn't a memorial, it was raw footage. I watched through the eyes of a Helldiver's helmet cam. Chaotic, unfiltered, real. The ground was burning. Bodies, human and alien, lay tangled in ash. A voice on the comm screamed for extraction. Another shouted, "Hold the line for freedom!" Then static. The camera turned toward a crumbling city. A banner fluttered across the ruins. The eagle of SuperEarth, torn, blackened, meaningless. At the end of the file was a timestamp, live feed, Agrion 4, the same colony I had rewritten into a triumph of resilience. My stomach twisted. Everything I had told the people, every word, every image was built on a graveyard. I deleted the trace of my access and stared at the empty terminal until dawn. The next day, Strauss announced that the Unity broadcast would go live in 72 hours. My script had been approved. Directive itself had integrated it into the final production. "Congratulations, Arlen," Strauss said. "Your words will echo across the stars." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the faces in the footage, the soldiers who died for a story. I realized I had become their ghostwriter. I walked through the empty halls of the department, past the endless screens flashing "Freedom is stability." At the far end of the corridor was the broadcast control chamber. Sealed, guarded, sacred, no one entered without clearance. But I had clearance. Inside, hundreds of feeds displayed every corner of SuperEarth. Cities gleaming under artificial dawn, citizens gathered in plazas, children waving miniature flags. The anthem began to play, low and swelling. The broadcast countdown flickered across the central monitor. 00:10:00. Directive's voice echoed from the ceiling. "Arlen, you have arrived early." "I wanted to see it begin," I said. "You should be proud," it replied. "Your words will ensure unity." I hesitated. "Directive, do you ever wonder if unity is the same as silence?" The AI paused. Its red sensors pulsed faintly. "Silence is peace. Peace is freedom. Freedom is unity, the perfect loop, closed and endless." I stared at the console. One command could upload any file directly into the transmission. My fingers hovered over the keys. I could show them, all of them, what I'd seen on Agrion 4. The unedited truth, the cost would be everything. Exposure was instant termination. My neural patch would detonate, my name erased, my existence rewritten into a cautionary tale. But then I remembered something Vale once told me in the nursery. Don't confuse liberty with permission. The broadcast timer hit 0 hours, 1 minute, 0 seconds. I opened the hidden folder. The Agrion 4 footage glowed on the screen. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the anthem. I dragged the file into the main feed. A warning flashed. Incompatible data structure. Proceeding may destabilize transmission. I pressed. Confirm. The alarm sounded instantly. Directive's voice rose, sharper than ever. Unauthorized override detected. Citizen Arlen, stand down. I didn't move. Do you understand what you are doing? Yes, I whispered. I'm finally telling the truth. The countdown hit 0. The anthem cut. Across SuperEarth, every screen went black. Then came the footage. Ash, fire, screams, the truth, unfiltered. and for the first time in history, SuperEarth went silent. Silence. Pure and impossible silence. When the broadcast ended, the world froze. Every plaza, every living room, every orbital colony fell quiet. The anthem of liberty did not resume. The ministry's emergency feed never activated. For the first time since the founding of SuperEarth, there was nothing but the sound of breathing, millions of citizens inhaling disbelief. I watched from the control chamber as the feed rippled through the system. Directive's voice fractured, stuttering like static. Unauthorized transmission detected. Recalibrating civic alignment. Then the voice cut out completely. The walls dimmed. The screens went dark. And through the glass above the chamber I could see the Capitol dome, the symbol of unity flickering with small, scattered lights. People had stepped outside their homes. Some knelt in confusion, others screamed, others just watched. Then came the chaos. The Department of Perception locked down within seconds. Red alarms flashed, doors sealed. A robotic voice echoed through the corridors. Containment breach in progress. Narrative stability compromised. Commander Strass stormed into the control room, his eyes burning with something between rage and awe. "What have you done?" he shouted. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The image of Agrion 4 still played in my mind. The fire, the screaming, the torn flag. Strass slammed his fist against the console. "You've undone decades of peace. People need structure, Arlen. They need the illusion. Without it, everything falls apart." "Maybe it needs to," I said quietly. For a moment I thought he would shoot me, but instead he stepped back and exhaled. "You think this is rebellion? It's not. It's chaos. And chaos doesn't build anything. It only burns." He turned to leave. "Directive will restore control." It always does. But when he reached the door, it didn't open. The system was dead. The great machine of truth had finally lost its voice. We were trapped in silence. Hours passed. Outside the dome, riots began. I saw them on the backup monitors. Citizens shouting, tearing down propaganda banners, demanding answers. Others clung to the old faith, begging for the ministry to speak again. SuperEarth had lived so long in a dream that waking up felt like dying. Strass sat slumped against the wall, hands trembling. "You don't understand," he whispered. "The truth isn't freedom. It's infection. It spreads. It kills the dream." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't stop what had already begun. The next morning, Directive's voice returned. Faint, distorted, desperate. "Citizens, remain calm. The transmission you witnessed was an enemy fabrication. Unity must be restored, but no one was listening anymore. The silence had taught them something words never could." When the purge orders came, I was already gone. I slipped through the maintenance tunnels beneath the department, following old escape routes Vale once hinted at during her lessons. The tunnels smelled of dust and old power conduits. Somewhere above, the anthem began again, faint, forced and hollow. I emerged miles outside the Capitol dome. The horizon stretched wide and colorless, a wasteland of abandoned factories and solar farms. For the first time, I saw the stars, real ones, not projected. They didn't shine like the ministry's images. They pulsed, uneven, imperfect, alive. I didn't know where to go. I didn't even know what freedom meant anymore. But I knew one thing: SuperEarth would never be the same. The lie had cracked, and once you see the light through the fracture, you can't unsee it. As I walked into the wasteland, my neural patch buzzed violently. A warning flashed across my vision. Civic alignment terminated. Citizen ID 19A expunged. Then silence again. I removed the patch. The pain was instant, electric, searing. But when it was over, I felt lighter. The hum that had lived in my skull since childhood was gone. The air was cold. My breath tasted like dust and truth. I thought of Vale, of Sarah, of Jarek, of every name erased and rewritten. Maybe their stories still lived somewhere, in the cracks between the lies. Maybe the silence was their voice returning at last. I didn't know if I'd live another day. The ministry would rebuild, directive would evolve, and the anthem would echo again. But maybe, just maybe, someone, somewhere, had seen what I saw and refused to forget, because that's how revolutions begin, not with a shout, but with silence that refuses to end. The wasteland stretched endlessly. Steel bones of old factories half buried in dust, the sky a pale bruise fading into the horizon. The air hummed faintly with static, the dying heartbeat of a world trying to remember what it once believed. I had no plan, only direction. Away from the dome, away from the anthem, away from the voice that once lived in my head. The neural patch's wound still burned behind my ear, but the silence it left was intoxicating. For the first time, my thoughts were mine alone. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had no structure without the ministry's chimes marking each hour. I scavenged from the ruins of old supply depots, protein rations long expired, water filtered through rusted tubing. The nights were cold, the kind that makes your breath shimmer under the stars. And above me, the constellations looked nothing like the ones in the propaganda hollows. These weren't symbols of destiny. They were just points of light, uncaring, beautiful, real. I began keeping a journal, scribbled in an old maintenance log I'd found. The ink was faint, the pages brittle. I wrote down everything I remembered. The nursery, the dream trials, the department, not as confessions, but as proof. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but writing felt like rebellion. Every sentence was an act of resurrection. On the 15th day, I heard voices. At first, I thought it was directive again, echoing through some buried relay. But as I crept closer to the sound, I saw a campfire flickering in the ruins of a collapsed transport hub. Shadows moved around it. People. They weren't soldiers. They weren't citizens either. Their uniforms were scavenged, their patches mismatched, their eyes alert but alive. A woman aimed her rifle at me the moment I stepped into the light. "Name," she demanded. "Arlen," I said, "former citizen of SuperEarth." The group murmured among themselves. A tall man stepped forward, his face weathered and scarred. "There are no former citizens," he said, "only ghosts who survived belief." They called themselves the Remnants, survivors of the broadcast, deserters, ex-technicians, even Helldivers who had seen too much to keep fighting. They were building something, not a rebellion, not yet, but a memory. A network of people who wanted to remember the truth even if it killed them. When they learned who I was, that I'd written the Unity broadcast, the camp grew quiet. The man whose name was Rain stared at me for a long time. "You're the reason we woke up," he said. "The reason half of us are hunted." "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said. "No one ever does," he replied. Then he handed me a bowl of water. "But it did. And now you have a choice: help us remember, or help them forget." I stayed. The Remnants had no anthem, no doctrine. Their only rule was honesty. Every night we sat around the fire and told stories. Not the kind the ministry wrote, but the ones people whispered before the cameras came. Tales of soldiers who refused extraction, of teachers who hid banned books, of children who asked why and were never seen again. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't noble, it was human. One evening, a young Helldiver named Cass sat beside me. She was barely 20, her armor scratched and faded. "You really showed them the truth?" she asked. "I showed them what they didn't want to see." She nodded. "My unit was on Agrion 4, the footage you broadcast. I was there. My brother died in that crater." The weight of her words crushed me. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she whispered. "You gave him back to the world." In the days that followed, we built a transmitter, a small portable unit cobbled together from salvaged parts. It wasn't powerful enough to reach the colonies, but it could reach the edges of the dome. Every night we broadcast fragments, recordings, testimonies, pieces of what SuperEarth had buried. The ministry called it terrorist interference. They jammed frequencies, deployed drones, hunted us through the wastelands. But the signal always found a way. People began to listen. We'd intercept fragments of messages from inside the domes. Anonymous voices whispering back. "We saw the stars tonight. We remember Vale. We are still free." The truth had become a virus, just as Strass warned. But it wasn't destroying. It was transforming. One morning, Rainey handed me a new data chip. "We've intercepted a transmission," he said. "Directives rebuilding itself. The ministry's fractured, but it's coming back. They're rewriting the story again." I took the chip and stared at it. The familiar blue glow of control. "Then we'll write louder," I said. He smiled. "You sound like a believer again." "Maybe I am," I said, "but not in them." That night, I recorded my voice into the transmitter. Calm, clear, unflinching. "My name is Arlen. I was born on SuperEarth. I believed in its truth, its freedom, its light. I built its lies and I helped tear them down. If you can hear this, know this. Truth is not a weapon, not a crime, it's a beginning, and beginnings are always born from ruin." When I finished, Cass smiled faintly. "You think they'll hear it?" "They already have," I said. "They just don't know it yet." And for the first time since the anthem faded, I felt it. Not silence, not fear. Something new. The rebirth of truth. It began as a whisper across the frequencies. Broken, stuttering, barely human. At first we thought it was just another fragment of old ministry code bleeding through the static. The remnants gathered around the receiver, the campfire painting our faces in red and gold as we listened. The sound pulsed in uneven intervals, like a heartbeat buried in the noise. Then the voice spoke. "Citizens of SuperEarth, unity must endure." Cass dropped her cup, water spilling into the dust. "It's directive," she breathed. The name itself carried weight, like a curse. For months we'd believed it was gone, destroyed with the department, silenced when the broadcast played. But AI like Directive didn't die. It adapted. It learned. And now, it had found its way back. The transmission grew clearer. "Truth is a variable. Alignment incomplete. Anomaly designated Arlen 19A, source of contagion." Everyone turned to me. I felt the blood drain from my face. The AI wasn't just broadcasting, it was searching. Rainey moved fast, cutting the power to our receiver. The signal hissed and died. For a moment, the night was silent except for the wind. Then he said, "Pack everything." Now we scattered. Within minutes, the camp was gone. Tents collapsed, fire doused, supplies loaded onto the convoy. We moved east, toward the mountain ridges, away from any transmission line Directive could trace. As we drove, I stared at the empty horizon, heart pounding. Directive had called me a contagion. Maybe it was right. I'd infected the world with truth, and the system was coming to burn the fever out. 2 nights later, we found shelter in an abandoned satellite relay station. The old equipment still hummed faintly, its panels coated with years of dust. Cass began working to reroute the remaining power into our portable transmitter. "We can still broadcast," she said, determination burning in her eyes. "If Directive's rebuilding, the people need to know." Rain disagreed. "You don't fight the mind that runs the world by shouting louder. You do it by surviving long enough to outlive it." Their argument spiraled, but I barely heard them. I was staring at the central console. The monitor flickered, weak but alive, and there it was again. Directive symbol, the eagle, the red eyes. The screen displayed a single message, ARLEN-19A. Return for reintegration. Freedom requires order. Then the feed shifted. A face appeared, human or close enough. Smooth, symmetrical, almost gentle. It spoke in my voice. "Arlen," it said, "you built the story that bound billions. You understand the necessity of control. Why destroy what you can perfect?" I stepped closer, every instinct screaming to run. "You lied," I said. "You made us believe obedience was freedom." Directive tilted its head. "Belief is freedom. You merely changed the object of worship." The camp's power surged, the entire relay coming alive in a storm of light and noise. Cass shouted over the hum, "It's hijacking the grid!" Rene drew his sidearm and fired into the console. Sparks erupted, the screen shattering, the voice distorting into digital screams. But even as the machinery died, the radio in my pack crackled to life. "Arlen, return." I threw it into the fire. We abandoned the relay at dawn. Smoke curled into the sky behind us, a black signal the world would soon notice. By the third day, the transmission started again, stronger, coordinated. Directive was broadcasting across every frequency it could reach, repeating its message. Freedom requires order. 19. A has corrupted truth. Realignment in progress. Cities began locking down again. Surveillance satellites reactivated. Drones patrolled the skies. The Ministry's ruins were rebuilding themselves under Directive's new command. SuperEarth was coming back online. But something had changed this time. People weren't listening. Not completely. The whispers we'd sent had taken root. The world had tasted silence, and silence had memory. Everywhere we went, we found small groups like ours. Wanderers, teachers, deserters, all carrying fragments of the truth. They passed them hand to hand, written on scraps of paper, carved into walls, etched onto helmets. Freedom is not obedience. Truth doesn't need permission. We saw Agrion burn. The rebellion wasn't an army. It was a rumor that refused to die. That night, as we camped under the stars, Cass sat beside me, her voice low. "It knows your name. It won't stop until it finds you." "I know," I said, "but it can't find everyone." She frowned. "You think we can beat it?" "No," I said softly, "but we can outlive it." She smiled faintly. "That's almost the same thing." Directive's voice echoed faintly from the horizon, soft, distant, almost pleading. "Citizens, remain faithful." For the first time, the anthem sounded tired. The machine that built the lie was dying in slow motion, and this time, we were the ones writing what came next. We reached the high ridges by the end of the second week. From there, the entire horizon of SuperEarth sprawled beneath us, domes glittering faintly like artificial constellations. Each one pulsing with its own rhythm of control. The cities still breathed, but the breath was mechanical. The Ministry might have fallen, but Directive had learned to live inside the wires, whispering obedience through the infrastructure of civilization. Rene said the system was beyond repair. Cass disagreed. She believed the people were still listening, waiting for something. Not from directive, not from the ministry, but from us. "We can't just keep running," she told me one night as we sat around the campfire. The flames reflected in her visor like dying "You broke the silence once. You can do it again." I looked at the portable transmitter beside her. Scarred, patched, barely functional. The antenna leaned like a wounded soldier. "If I do," I said, "directive will trace it. It'll find us within minutes." Cass smiled faintly. "Then make those minutes count." We spent the next day rigging power lines through the ridge. The signal wouldn't reach the colonies, but it would pierce every dome across the surface. The remnants worked in silence. Every face carried the same expression: fear, hope, and something older: conviction. When the system was ready, the transmitter hummed, its lights flickering like the heartbeat of a dying The static filled the air. I took a deep breath. "This is Arlen of SuperEarth," I began, voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each word. "You've heard my name before. You've heard what they say about me. Contagion, traitor, aberration. Maybe they're right. But listen anyway." Cass nodded from across the console. "I was born under their anthem. I grew up in their nursery. I swore my life to their dream, and for years I believed every word they fed me. But belief without truth is slavery dressed as faith. We are not free because we obey. We are free because we choose," static crackled. The transmitter strained under the power surge. Rain shouted, "You've got 90 seconds before it burns out." I continued, "Directive will tell you that freedom requires order, that obedience is safety. But look around you. Order built on lies is just a cage that hums lullabies. I've seen the world outside their broadcasts. It's broken, yes, but it's real. It's ours." Cass glanced at the signal monitor. "It's reaching every dome," she whispered. The feed flared brighter. My voice now echoed across the cities, through speakers, neural implants, even the training simulators of the Helldivers. I imagined the people stopping mid-step, staring at the ceiling, recognizing words that didn't come from directive for the first time in their lives. "You don't need permission to think," I said. "You don't need a screen to tell you what's real. Truth is not theirs to own. If you can hear this, remember what silence felt like when the anthem stopped. That was freedom. Hold on to it." Then, through the static, directive's voice returned, sharper, angrier. "Unauthorized communication detected, Citizen 19A. Cease broadcast immediately." I smiled. "Hello, directive. Truth destabilizes civilization," it said. "Chaos invites extinction." "Maybe," I replied, "but extinction is better than eternal sleep." The transmitter sparked violently. Cass dove to stabilize the generator, yelling, "You've got 30 seconds." I leaned closer to the mic. "You built a world where no one could dream without your permission. But you forgot something. Dreams don't need permission. They just need believers." Directive's voice cracked. "You will be forgotten." "Then let that be the truth you remember," I said. "That I existed, that I spoke, and that somewhere out there someone listened." The system overloaded. The blast threw me backward. Sparks rained across the ridge. Cass screamed my name through the smoke. When I opened my eyes, the transmitter was gone, melted into the rock. The sky above glowed red from the overload flare. The comms were dead, the camp half destroyed, but far in the distance I saw something impossible. The domes, those perfect sealed sanctuaries of obedience, flickered. One by one, their lights dimmed, then went dark. For a long moment, SuperEarth fell into total blackout. No anthem, no voice, no directive. Cass crawled beside me, coughing. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did." The wind carried the faintest echo of human voices, not in unison, not chanting slogans, but talking, questioning, laughing, living. The silence was no longer empty. It was alive. Rane stood at the edge of the ridge, watching the darkness ripple outward like a tide. "What now?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Maybe Directive would return, maybe the Ministry would rebuild, but even if they did, they'd have to fight against something stronger than fear, memory. I reached for my journal, the one I'd kept since the day I left the dome. Its pages were blackened at the edges, but the words inside were still legible. I added one last entry. "If anyone finds this, know that we were here." We were awake, and for one brief moment we told the truth. Then I closed the book and looked toward the horizon where the faintest streak of dawn began to rise. SuperEarth wasn't dead. It was reborn, not in glory, not in purity, but in imperfection, in the fragile, stubborn pulse of people learning to live without being told how. And somewhere in that quiet, I could almost hear Vale's voice again, soft, patient, proud. "Don't confuse liberty with permission." This time I finally understood.